A cool February morning settles over Baghdad. Merchants in the Souk el-Atarin arrange trays of saffron and indigo, their hands quick despite the rumors swirling through the city. The call to prayer echoes from the great mosque as barefoot children chase each other through the alleys, laughter briefly interrupting the anxious whispers among adults. Behind the thick mud brick walls, scribes hurry along the marble corridors of the Beit el-Hikmah, clutching manuscripts close to their chests. Ink stains their fingers as they copy treatises by candlelight, mindful of preserving the caliphate's knowledge. The faint scent of parchment lingers, mingling with the distant smoke from the bakeries. In the courtyards of affluent homes, women gather around basins, washing linen and speaking softly about absent husbands stationed on the city's ramparts. The clatter of pottery and the rhythmic splash of water form a backdrop to their careful glances at the clouds gathering over the horizon. On the city's eastern gate, Abbasid guards polish their chainmail and sharpened scimitars. Their faces are grim as they peer eastward, where the Tigris reflects the pale sky. Horses shift restlessly nearby, breath steaming in the chill, while a captain inspects the arrow supplies stacked beneath weathered banners. Within the bustling dye market, an apprentice dips cloth into vats of indigo, his hands tinted blue. The master dyer, beads of sweat on his brow, instructs with terse words, encouraging haste. Traders haggle over prices, but their eyes dart frequently to the north, where distant dust clouds are visible. By the riverside, fishermen haul in their morning catch, slicing silver carp atop wooden tables. The city's water wheels turn steadily, groaning under the weight of buckets lifting water from the Tigris. Vendors shout prices for fresh fish, while an old man mends nets by lantern light, humming an ancient tune. In a brick-walled madrasa, a teacher recites lines from Al-Mutanabi, while students etch verses onto wax tablets. The room smells of lamp oil and worn leather. Young boys, some barely awake, glance at the latticed windows, uneasy about the lessons, interrupted by the distant thud of drums beyond the city walls. On rooftops overlooking the round city, pigeons scatter as servants set out platters of dates and lamb stew for the midday meal. The aroma drifts down onto the bustling streets, where water sellers wind through crowds, their goatskin bags sloshing. A sudden shout causes everyone to pause, ears straining for news. In the caliphal gardens, gardeners in rough tunics prune citrus trees, their fingers sticky with sap. The fountains, once clear, now collect fallen leaves as peacocks call from shaded corners. An official strides past, delivering a sealed scroll to a waiting messenger, whose horse stamps impatiently at the garden's gate. Outside a humble clay-walled home, a family kneels on woven mats, sharing bowls of lentil soup. The father offers thanks under his breath, glancing toward his wife and children. The youngest child clutches a wooden toy, oblivious to the tension in the adults' hurried voices and the hurried footsteps of passing neighbors. At the western watchtower, sentries swap nervous jokes as they refill their quivers. One points out a hawk circling above, interpreting omens from its flight. Their commander, jaw set, consults a battered map spread across a crate, tracing the Mongol advance with a fingertip scarred from earlier campaigns. Weavers in a sunlit workshop beat looms with practiced arms, threads snapping in the dry air. Finished carpets are stacked by the door, ready for market, their intricate designs a point of pride. Yet behind their rhythmic labor, muted fear persists, and one pauses to pray quietly before returning to the shuttle. On the palace terrace, the caliph gazes across the city rooftops, his silk robe stirring in the breeze. Advisors murmur anxiously nearby, occasionally glancing at the distant horizon. Below, the muezzin's call rises once more, and for a final moment, Baghdad's daily life continues, balanced on the edge of calamity. Morning sunlight filtered through the arches of Baghdad's mosques, illuminating scholars hunched over parchment. Calligraphers dipped their reeds into black ink, copying texts preserved from Greece, India, and Persia. The House of Wisdom bustled with debate, its walls echoing with discussions in Arabic, Persian, Syriac, and Greek. Marketplace sellers arranged piles of dates, figs, and spices along the banks of the Tigris. Merchants unfurled woven silks from China and displayed glassware shimmering in the sunlight. Fishmongers bargained with women in embroidered veils, while caravan drivers led camels through the city's narrow, winding streets. Under the shade of domed porticos, mathematicians drew geometric patterns on sanded tables. Apprentices watched as their masters demonstrated equations and theories using ivory tablets and abacuses. The scent of parchment and ink filled the air, and the clatter of styluses echoed in courtyards where astronomy and algebra flourished. In the shadow of the Abbasid caliph's palace, guards in chainmail paced stone halls. Courtiers bowed as viziers entered, their robes trailing over mosaic floors. The caliph himself, al-Mustasim, presided over council chambers adorned with golden lamps and elaborate tapestries, deliberating the affairs of a vast and diverse empire. Across the city's bridges, water carriers balanced heavy goatskin bags as children laughed nearby. Artisans in tiled workshops hammered copper and beat silver into delicate filigree. The scent of rosewater drifted from perfumers' stalls, mingling with the aroma of roasting lamb from bustling eateries lining the main thoroughfares. In the Jewish quarter, scribes recited prayers as they mended Torah scrolls. Christian monks tended lush gardens within monastery courtyards, translating ancient texts into Arabic by candlelight. Baghdad's religious communities coexisted in a tapestry of faiths, with weekly processions threading through markets and neighborhoods. At dusk, musicians plucked the oud and struck the darbuka in opulent salons. Poets recited lines beneath latticed windows as hosts poured sweet sherbet into painted cups. The rhythm of conversation rose and fell with the melody, while intricate carpets cushioned guests reclining on pillow-strewn platforms. Beyond the city walls, farmers in palm groves harvested dates using curved knives, loading baskets onto donkeys for transport. Irrigation canals fed fields of wheat and barley. Shepherds led flocks of sheep along dusty roads, calling to one another in the fading light as the minarets of Baghdad loomed in the distance. Inside the city's libraries, translators worked by lamplight, rendering Sanskrit, Greek, and Syriac treatises into Arabic. Shelves sagged under the weight of hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Papermakers soaked linen rags, pressing them into sheets in workshops filled with the low hum of activity and the scent of damp pulp. In workshops near the river, craftsmen carved astrolabes from brass and inlaid boxes with ivory and ebony. Apprentices filed metal, learning to shape surgical instruments, while alchemists distilled rosewater and sought to transmute metals. The clang of hammers and hiss of furnaces signaled a city alive with invention. Boatmen pulled narrow skiffs along the Tigris, ferrying passengers between neighborhoods crisscrossed by canals. Fishermen cast nets from reed boats near the riverbanks, hauling in carp and catfish for the city's kitchens. Barges laden with timber and grain docked at bustling wharves, their crews shouting orders in a dozen languages. Beneath the arches of Baghdad's Grand Bazaar, lamp makers crafted glass oil lamps decorated with colored enamel. Shoppers haggled for ceramics glazed in turquoise, while perfumed smoke curled from incense braziers. Wealthy patrons commissioned jewelers to set rubies and emeralds in golden rings, exchanging coins minted with the caliph's seal. Every evening, the muezzin's call to prayer echoed from minarets, drawing crowds to courtyards paved with marble. Shoeless worshippers lined up shoulder to shoulder, bowing and prostrating on woven mats. After prayers, elders gathered to share news and stories, their voices weaving together the vibrant, layered narrative of Baghdad's daily life. Winter winds stalked the plains as Mongol horsemen ringed Baghdad's massive brick walls. From the ramparts, anxious sentinels watched fires flicker on the horizon. The city's gates were barred and reinforced, while inside the markets fell silent, and residents hoarded what meager grain remained in darkened storerooms. Hulagu Khan's troops constructed fortified encampments along the Tigris, driving wooden stakes into the frozen ground. Engineers assembled enormous siege engines, mangonels and trebuchets. Slaves and conscripts hauled stones, logs, and ropes, their breaths forming clouds in the bone-chilling air. Street criers delivered ominous proclamations from Caliph al-Mustasim, urging calm and faith in divine protection. Meanwhile, Baghdad's craftsmen toiled by lamplight, fashioning arrowheads and reinforcing city barricades with iron bands, their hammers ringing through alleys shrouded in tension. Refugees surged in from outlying villages, clutching bundles and children, spreading tales of burned fields and razed homes. The city's mosques overflowed as imams led prayers for deliverance. Water carriers jostled through packed bazaars as panic buying emptied shops and tempers flared among hungry crowds. Mongol scouts surveyed the city's canals and bridges, mapping every route for the coming assault. They captured fishermen on the riverbanks and pressed them for information, tying prisoners to wooden posts near their commanders' tents as warnings. Those who resisted were cut down without mercy. Within Baghdad's palaces, viziers convened urgent councils, their voices rising as they debated surrender or resistance. Couriers hurried through mosaic-tiled corridors, bringing lists of dwindling supplies and reports of sabotage among frightened city guards. Outside, the city's gardens and granaries stood vulnerable to fire arrows. At dusk, the Mongols launched probing attacks along the outer walls, loosing volleys of arrows that whistled through the dusk. Defenders returned fire from parapets, oil lamps illuminating the battered stonework. Onlookers huddled behind doors, straining to hear the clash of iron and the shouts of wounded men. Baghdad's renowned scholars gathered rare manuscripts into hidden chambers, fearing the destruction of their libraries. Scribes worked feverishly by candlelight, copying precious texts onto parchment scraps. In the alleys, rumors spread of traitors seeking favor with the besiegers, fueling suspicion and midnight confrontations. By the river, merchants sunk their most valuable wares into the muddy banks, hoping to recover them if the city fell. Fishermen dismantled boats to prevent their use by the invaders, tossing broken oars and planks into the swirling Tigris. Guards patrolled the docks, searching for spies in the fog. Mongol engineers began diverting the Tigris, piling earth to redirect the river's flow and weaken Baghdad's defenses. Laborers, chained together, heaved soil and stones under the whips of overseers. The sound of rushing water and shouted orders echoed across the city's flooded suburbs. Inside overcrowded houses, families whispered prayers as the booms of Mongol catapults shook the windows. Mothers wrapped children in blankets, rocking them to sleep beside shuttered windows. Outside, the acrid smell of burning timber drifted in as fire arrows set outlying buildings alight, painting the night sky orange. Food stores shrank rapidly, doling out hard loaves to lines that snaked around corners. In the poorer quarters, fights erupted over sacks of rice. Physicians tended the wounded in makeshift clinics, their hands stained red as they fought to save soldiers carried in from the ramparts. With each dawn, the Mongols moved their siege weapons closer, crawling behind wooden mantlets. Baghdad's defenders braced for the final assault, patching cracks in the walls with mud and timber. Through torchlit nights, the city's bells tolled warnings, echoing through labyrinthine streets as pressure mounted from every direction. Morning in Baghdad, February 1258. The sun clambers over the eastern horizon, casting light on a city gripped by tension. Merchants hurriedly nail shutters over their shop fronts in the bazaar, while families carry buckets of water up narrow staircases to their rooftop terraces, preparing for the unknown that shadows every street. Within the walls of a modest home near the Mustansiriya Madrasa, a mother quietly stacks clay jars of grain behind thick woven curtains. Her children peer out through lattice windows, watching silent men gather in alleyways. Fear hangs in the air, punctuated by the distant, rhythmic pounding of Mongol siege engines beyond the city's defenses. Inside the Abbasid palace, caliphal servants rush across polished marble corridors, their footsteps echoing under towering arches. Viziers cluster around parchment maps in candlelit chambers, urgently debating strategy. The caliph himself paces near jewel-inlaid doors, the weight of command pressing visibly on his shoulders, as muffled cries drift in from outside. In Baghdad's cramped Jewish quarter, a rabbi hastily removes sacred scrolls from their wooden cases, handing them to trembling students. Paper-wrapped bundles are hidden beneath floorboards, while elders murmur prayers beneath their breath. From within thick stone walls, the faint clang of Mongol armor grows steadily louder with each passing hour. At the city's southern docks along the Tigris, boatmen shove their vessels into the muddy current. Passengers, families clutching bundles of bedding and battered chests, scramble aboard, risking the river's winter chill to escape. As the first fires flicker in the distance, hurried farewells are exchanged on planked gangways, hope and dread mingling in tear-streaked faces. On the city's western ramparts, sentries peer through arrow slits at the Mongol encampment sprawling across the plain. Engineers frantically reinforce battered wooden gates with iron bands, while archers stack bundles of arrows beside oil-soaked cauldrons. The sharp tang of burning pitch mixes with the dust swirling along the wall walk. In the bazaar's labyrinth and alleys, shopkeepers push heavy chests beneath low counters. Goldsmiths hurriedly hammer shut their strongroom doors, and carpet sellers roll up intricate Persian rugs, tying them with frayed cords. The sounds of commerce fade as shutters slam and the marketplace empties, leaving only the echo of hurried footsteps on flagstones. Within the vast halls of the House of Wisdom, scholars clutch prized manuscripts to their chests, debating whether to stay and protect or flee with precious knowledge. Scribes pack scrolls into leather satchels, while glass inkwells shatter on mosaic floors. The building's grand arches stand in silent witness to hurried, anxious deliberation. A noble's garden villa, once filled with laughter, is now a place of hushed urgency. Servants hurriedly drain fountains and haul silver platters to hidden cellars. In a tiled reception hall, the family huddles together, listening as the thunder of Mongol hoofbeats draws nearer, their every movement muffled by the thick damask curtains. Deep within the city's oldest mosque, the imam leads a small congregation in prayer. Candles flicker atop the mihrab as whispers of faith fill the cool, incense-laden air. Outside, the muffled crash of a breached gate punctuates the recitation, and worshippers glance anxiously at the heavy wooden doors barring the entrance. In the stables behind the main caravanserai, grooms frantically saddle horses under the flicker of oil lamps. Merchants argue over whose animals will be taken for a last, desperate flight. The musky scent of hay mixes with sweat as hooves clatter on packed earth, and the distant roar of panic grows ever closer. Along Baghdad's narrow canals, fishermen pull their small craft beneath stone bridges, ferrying neighbors across in exchange for coins or loaves of bread. Children clutch at mothers' skirts as they duck into low passages, while an old man stows his fishing net among rushes, gazing uneasily at the smoke curling above the city's skyline. As night falls, Mongol torches bob along the breached ramparts, casting flickering light into courtyards and across battered doors. In a shadowy hallway, a family huddles together behind overturned furniture. The crash of splintering wood, the rush of feet on mosaic floors, and whispered prayers mingle as Baghdad's fate is sealed, one room at a time. In the chill of late January 1258, Hulagu Khan's army assembled on the eastern bank of the Tigris. Siege engineers began erecting vast trebuchets, while laborers dragged felled palm trunks to build pontoon bridges. The Mongols' relentless preparation rippled through the air as the city's defenders watched with mounting dread from Baghdad's battered walls. Inside the city, Caliph al-Mustasim's courtiers debated frantically in candlelit chambers. Messengers, breathless and mud-spattered, relayed reports from the gates, sightings of Mongol scouts, the pounding of hooves, the smoke of villages burning beyond the horizon. The Caliph, torn between fear and pride, hesitated to surrender or strengthen the city's defenses. Baghdad's residents, sensing impending doom, flocked to the main mosques and markets. Merchants shuttered their shops, while artisans stashed tools and valuables in hidden cellars. In alleyways, children clung to mothers' robes as black banners bearing Mongol script appeared atop distant hillocks, casting a shadow over daily life. At dawn, Mongol detachments launched probing attacks, their arrows whistling over the city's crumbling ramparts. Defenders struggled to repair breaches with sandbags and carts of rubble. Soldiers fired back with crossbows and Greek fire, the acrid smoke curling toward the invaders, who remained just out of reach. Water wheels along the Tigris turned slowly as the Mongols began to cut irrigation ditches, diverting water and choking the city's supply. Fishermen abandoned their skiffs, watching as silt clouded the river. The once teeming docks grew silent, only the distant clang of hammers echoing from the besiegers' camp. On the sixth day, Hulagu's engineers rolled massive siege towers forward, their wooden sides bristling with animal hides soaked in vinegar to resist flames. Storming ladders clattered against stone as Mongol warriors surged forward, shields raised. From above, defenders hurled boiling oil and stones, desperate to halt the advance. As Baghdad's outer defenses collapsed, panic surged through the streets. Refugees streamed toward the city center, clutching children and meager possessions. Priests and scholars gathered rare manuscripts from the House of Wisdom, bundling them in linen in the hope of preservation. The sound of axes splintering gates echoed through the quarter. By night, fires spread unchecked through the Kark district. Flames danced across rooftops, illuminating fleeing silhouettes. Volunteers formed bucket lines along the Tigris, heaving water in vain. Amid the chaos, looters broke into storerooms, scattering grain and trampling baskets, as chaos overwhelmed any semblance of order. With the main gate breached, Mongol cavalry thundered down grand boulevards, horses' hooves clattering on tiles. Archers fired from horseback, their targets the fleeing, the resisting, the hiding. Baghdad's defenders, outnumbered and exhausted, fell back to the citadel, their banners torn, their armor battered and bloodied. In the House of Wisdom, scholars huddled among stacks of parchment, debating whether to submit or resist. Some clutched brass astrolabes, others whispered prayers. As Mongol warriors burst through the doors, fragile volumes fell to the floor, some trampled underfoot, others seized as trophies, the fate of centuries of knowledge uncertain. At the palace, Caliph al-Mustasim stood on a marble balcony, robes streaked with dust. Surrounded by his few remaining guards, he watched as Mongol banners replaced Abbasid standards along the city walls. The air was heavy with smoke and the cries of the wounded. He turned away, defeated, as Hulagu's envoys approached. In the final hours, Mongol commanders ordered the systematic destruction of Baghdad's infrastructure. Wells were poisoned, aqueducts smashed, and bridges set alight. Soldiers used iron crowbars to pry up marble pavements, searching for hidden valuables. Survivors crouched in alleys, shivering, as the sound of collapsing minarets signaled the sack's merciless completion. As the dust settled, the Tigris ran black with the ink of manuscripts dumped from the library. Mourners gathered in silent circles, clutching scraps of parchment and broken tiles. The city's once vibrant heart now pulsed with grief, echoing with the footsteps of those searching for loved ones among the ruins and ashes. Under a leaden February sky, Hulagu Khan's soldiers breached Baghdad's walls, battering the once mighty fortifications with siege engines and scaling ladders. Crowds of terrified citizens surged through narrow streets, clutching bundles of possessions, seeking sanctuary in mosques and homes suddenly transformed into fragile refuges. Smoke billowed over the Tigris as Mongol soldiers set fire to bustling bazaars. Stalls laden with silks, spices, and manuscripts vanished in flames. Merchants and laborers, their livelihoods burning before their eyes, scrambled to douse fires or desperately hurled goods into the river, hoping for preservation in the chaos. In the heart of the city, the House of Wisdom's domed roof cracked amidst the assault. Scholars and scribes, caught between fleeing and defiance, struggled to save armfuls of rare manuscripts, their ink-stained hands trembling as the precious volumes slipped into the fearful crowds and sometimes the muddy waters below. Al-Mustasim, the last Abbasid caliph, was dragged by Mongol guards through the palace halls. Courtiers huddled behind crimson curtains, muffling cries as the caliph's gilded robes swept the marble floors. Tapestries bearing centuries of dynastic victories hung limp, powerless against the iron authority of the invaders. Blood darkened the mosaic tiles lining Baghdad's Mern avenues. Survivors darted between abandoned carts and toppled columns, searching for loved ones. Mothers pressed children tightly against stone walls, whispering reassurances they barely believed, while armored horsemen thundered past, the clangor of hooves drowning the city's pleas. On the western banks, the Tigris ran red as soldiers hurled bodies into the current. Fishermen, their wooden boats rocking in the turbulence, watched in silent horror, clutching oars as the river carried the dead downstream. The once bountiful waterway became a grim procession, bearing witness to the city's devastation. Within narrow alleys, a handful of residents scrawled prayers onto scraps of parchment, tucking them into crumbling brickwork. The act, desperate and defiant, brought fleeting hope. Elsewhere, imams led furtive prayers in hidden corners, their voices subdued as the distant cries of the dying echoed through the shattered city. As the days dragged on, Mongol soldiers combed the ruins, searching for wealth and survivors. They pried open chests, splintered doors, and inspected crumbling minarets for hidden refugees. Some captives, forced at sword point, led the invaders to underground storerooms, trembling as they revealed caches of food and valuables. A pall of silence settled after the carnage. The calls to prayer faded, replaced by the cawing of crows circling the wreckage of the minaret. Once vibrant neighborhoods lay deserted, stray dogs nosing through debris, while a handful of women gathered water from cracked wells, eyes wary and voices muted. In the weeks following the sack, the city's survivors buried their dead in hastily dug graves outside the ruined gates. Fathers and sons, shoulders stooped, shoveled earth over their kin, sometimes marking graves with broken pottery shards or scraps of cloth, tokens of remembrance in a landscape stripped bare of its former glory. Hulagu Khan, satisfied with his conquest, ordered a census of the remaining population. Mongol scribes moved through districts, counting survivors and demanding tributes. Local notables, escorted by soldiers, negotiated for leniency, their hands stained with ink and sweat as they compiled lists of artisans, merchants, and laborers spared for rebuilding. Baghdad's libraries, their shelves gutted, became silent vaults. A few rescued books surfaced among merchants' wares, traded in whispers for bread or shelter. The scent of burnt parchment lingered in the air, and children, uncomprehending, played among blackened pillars, their laughter echoing faintly where scholars once debated philosophy and science. In the aftermath, caravans bearing displaced families crept along dusty roads toward distant towns. Survivors, faces veiled against the wind, balanced bundles of salvaged goods atop weary donkeys. Some set up makeshift camps beside ruined aqueducts, lighting small fires each night, seeking warmth and solace beneath the endless and different stars. In the aftermath of the Mongol armies departing Baghdad, survivors navigated streets littered with scorched manuscripts and shattered pottery. The Tigris ran dark with the ink of thousands of books, their pages torn and swept away, as scholars and scribes desperately searched the wreckage for salvageable texts and relics of their once great library. Amidst the ruins of Baghdad's grand mosques, imams and elders gathered fragments of charred Qurans, piecing together verses by memory and candlelight. Their whispered recitations were acts of preservation, binding oral tradition with the hope that Baghdad's spiritual and intellectual legacy might endure beyond the ashes. Across the city, mothers and children wept as they scoured collapsed homes for hidden heirlooms, carved wooden chests, copper utensils, and family talismans buried beneath scorched beams. These small acts of recovery infused meaning into survival, as each object evoked memories of life before the siege. Throughout the following weeks, refugees streamed from Baghdad's broken gates, leading camels laden with what little they could carry. Their dust-caked faces bore silent testament to the trauma, while among them, storytellers recounted the horrors witnessed, embedding these scenes into the collective memory of the Islamic world. On the banks of the Tigris, former scribes and students gathered at dawn, tracing letters in the mud with sticks. Their actions became symbolic gestures of resistance as they reconstructed lessons, debated philosophy, and attempted to restore fragments of lost knowledge through communal recollection. In distant cities, word of Baghdad's fate arrived on parchment carried by trembling merchants. Coffee houses and bazaars buzzed with urgent retellings. Artists and calligraphers created somber illustrations of Baghdad's burning skyline, capturing the scale of devastation for generations who would never witness it firsthand. Within the crumbling city, artisans and metalworkers melted down broken swords and armor left by the Mongols. They recast the metal into new, utilitarian tools, a transformation that signaled resilience and the city's painful adaptation to its altered reality. As the Mongols established their rule, new governors convened in the ruined palaces, issuing decrees over worn tablets. Local clerks, employed under duress, recorded these orders with trembling hands, their faces betraying a mixture of fear and reluctant acceptance of the city's new overlords. Pilgrims returning to the city's shrines found shattered domes and tombs ravaged by fire. Some knelt amid the rubble to offer prayers, gathering stones to rebuild modest altars, their devotion forging a physical and spiritual bridge to Baghdad's sacred past. In later years, chroniclers like Ibn al-Kaf described in meticulous detail the heaps of bones and ruined gardens that remained. Their ink-stained fingers documented the loss, ensuring that the suffering and destruction would be remembered in the chronicles copied in distant libraries. Generations of poets composed elegies for Baghdad, their verses echoing through madrasas and private gatherings. With each recitation, listeners imagined the city's golden age, drawing inspiration and sorrow from memories of moonlit courtyards, flowing fountains, and the silence that followed the Mongol onslaught. Centuries later, visitors to Baghdad glimpsed remnants of the past, a carved marble basin, battered but intact, where the faint outline of a library's foundation. Each artifact, uncovered by careful hands, anchored memory to place, and offered testimony to a civilization's endurance through the scars left by 12